Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I've got some good stuff to talk about today. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that company OpenAI? Well, apparently they're losing the billions of dollars. Apparently by 2027, I guess, they're going to be totally bankrupt. So you know what, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking into this. I'm going to look into a lot of goofy stuff today, but honestly, I'm happy. I told you that we are changing the fight. We are winning somehow. Not too long ago, literally like a few days ago, I've been making some more Microsoft stuff, mostly because when it comes to AI nonsense, a lot of people are actually fighting back, specifically against the data center epidemic that's hitting them. It's not that data centers are bad or anything. It's just people are learning that when somebody comes into your small town and sets up shop, it's good in the short term because you're building this monolith. Later on down the road, there's really not that many jobs to be made, and suddenly everything around you just goes up in prices, specifically your electricity. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion regarding AI slop. For instance, Slop'Ya from Microslop comes out and talks about what I believe to be the biggest tell of how things are, okay? You know that meme on 4chan is like, you really don't know how bad things truly are. Now, Slop'Ya went out and said, we will quickly lose even the social permission to take something like energy, which is a scarce resource, it is true, to generate tokens. Now remember, AI, okay, just to give you an idea about how AI works, anytime you want artificial intelligence to give you goofy ideas, it spins up a model into memory, basically taking a lot, and then it thinks it through and generates these. Now this is all generated, all of these words are tokens. AI, when it spits this stuff out, is not spitting it to look cool, it's because it's generating tokens. So for instance, if I ask it, do you have ideas of using their artwork as personalized gifts? Click that, it thinks, and then it spits out, tokens. Now, all of these tokens spin up my GPU, which is like a 4090, a pretty expensive card. So it's a very expensive thing to do. And as you can imagine, if you're a company like OpenAI or Microslop or any of these guys, with tons of people hammering you, it costs a lot per day to run, okay? That's just the reality of it. Now he goes and says, if these tokens are not improving health outcomes, education outcomes, public sector efficiency, private sector competitiveness across everything, that is ultimately the goal. And he's not wrong. He'll lose the social permission. In fact, he's not wrong to the point that he's already losing social permission. Remember, like a few days ago, Microsoft was the one that was like putting out these 5-point plans on how we can bring a data center to your town. And, obviously I think people should not swallow the bullshit. It's one of the reasons why I make these videos, because I think that there has been a immensely amazing perspective shift for the average person to look at this technology that these companies are pushing with a bit more realism. Now, I'm not one of those AI doomerist channels that like sits down and thinks, when that bubble pops, everything's gonna go away. You can't uninvent technology, but you can make it so that a lot of the profit incentives for these technologies, a lot of the commoditization, a lot of the consolidation, where a lot of these companies like Amazon, for instance, a few days ago, were like, Jeff Bezos were like, a lot of computers, hopefully people get used to renting stuff from the internet. That needs to change, okay? A lot of these guys would wish it so that they owned all of the chips, RAM, GPUs, so you could have to rent actual computers from them, and if you want to use things like artificial intelligence, you will never have the chance to run it yourself. I just showed you how I was running local AI. These people probably wouldn't enjoy it if you actually had the means to run fully uncensored models, fully available models on your own system. These are the guys that want you to exclusively use their shit. And to see Microslop actually kind of freak out a little bit here is really good to see. The reason why you can't buy a stick of RAM for a reasonable price is because these guys are the ones that are buying all of the supply, and in some cases, not even doing anything with it. So anyways, Microslop has a lot of investments in companies like OpenAI. Remember, anytime you use Microslop CoSlop, you're actually using a white label version of something like ChatGPT. It's kind of like, you want gamer subs, you go right to the gamer subs. Code SOG, by the way, you get right to the heart and potatoes. You don't want to use like a white label energy powder. You want it straight from the goon caves below. So yeah, ultimately speaking, if I wanted to use Microslop Copilot, I would probably just use ChatGPT. But thank God I use neither in this case. Now, anyways, for people who are wondering how the fuck do we know that OpenAI is losing all this money? Well, because the guys over at The Information dug up some reports and some information from them that apparently has a lot of the finances, and they don't really look all that picturesque. So, for instance, when it comes to the actual reality of the situation, OpenAI could actually lose $44 billion until 2029. Okay, so again, it's so bad that they could expect bankruptcy by 2027. Now, again, this all makes sense because, like the local AI I just showed you at the earlier in the video, it requires a mass amount of money to keep this stuff going. A lot of these companies are just burning cash way faster than they can generate any form of income. Forget revenue in this case in general. So unless you're a company like Google, where you have a lot of fingers in a pie, unless you're a company like Grok, where you're basically like financed by the richest guy in the world, or you're a company like Microslop, which has a user base of basically most of the desktop users in the world, you don't really have the money to be playing this game. So OpenAI doesn't necessarily do that. Remember, OpenAI started from like an open, like non-profit business model, and then they turned into this profit business model. In fact, in a later video that I want to be working on, they actually have a situation where literally April of this year, there's going to be like the messiest lawsuit in the world that opens up a lot of how this stuff internally works. So look, the money that's moved around this bubble, from company to company to company, it's not there infinitely, right? Like, yes, the AI stuff was cool for a little bit, but now when people realize that it's way too expensive to get going, the efficiency, sure, it might show up, and in some cases it does, right? Like, a lot of the money it takes to train some of these models, from my understanding, is sort of diminished a little bit too. But ultimately, in the end, you're kind of throwing money into a hole, and you're hoping that the returns can show up before you've spent too much money. Now, the thing is, will ChatGPT go away forever? Probably not, okay? They're in a position where if they lose all of their money, okay, somewhere down the road, it'll probably be Microsoft. They'll actually just completely control the product. And then you'll see all the AI very much inserted into everything Windows related, more so than you've seen right now. The other day, I literally saw something that made me honestly shocked. I didn't know whether to believe this or not, but it is actually real. Apparently, there was an issue with Microsoft Windows again. Where they sent out an update because apparently computers that had this secure launch feature enabled were unable to shut down or enter hibernation. Could you imagine if like this was installed onto like a handheld gaming PC? You hit the power button expecting the thing to just like hibernate or shut down. You throw it into your backpack and you just find out that it's been cooking the insides when you actually open the bag up. That's just crazy stuff to see. But again, this was also relegated, to my understanding, primarily to enterprise and IoT editions, which is really why I didn't freak out too much. I don't think that there's many people who are using these editions of Windows 11 yet. But, again, it's just funny to laugh at. It makes me wonder how companies like Walt Disney feel after pimping out their most prized products for about $1 billion investments into OpenAI and seeing the actual writing on the wall. And in some cases, I actually don't even think that Disney understood how bad things were going to get, because unless you were in like the Silicon Valley tech sphere, you really didn't know how much money, I guess, you were actually burning into this. But even for a company like Disney, they'll just keep making their goddamn slop in some way with another company if things tend to falter. Or Microsoft comes in and they're like, sure, don't worry, you make the next Star Wars movie if you're ever going to do it with this software, and it'll be just as shitty as the last few have been. Now, ultimately, it's not the worst thing imaginable too, right? Actually, according to the people that brought this information, they said things like their cash burn wasn't even as bad as they had actually thought before. So yeah, it makes sense, truth be told, right? Like things kind of do get a little bit more efficient, but for every efficient thing we find, there's also aspects of AI that are getting way more expensive. So things like reasoning models have absolutely jumped up in computational cost. And right now we really are at a point where we're just chucking money into the hole. And I think some of the worst examples are, right? Like if you're somebody using ChatGPT for free, you're basically bleeding their servers dry. I mean, even if you're paying money monthly for them, I think I was reading somewhere that the amount of people that spend money monthly on ChatGPT, their usage rates are so high that the money they spend still leads to ChatGPT blowing more money in the long term, right? So you could spend $20 a month, but if you use like $30 of tokens, you're still a harm to the company, right? You're just slightly subsidizing them a little bit. What is interesting is like how much Microslop has sort of been involved into OpenAI. So when I was looking closely into the actual like lawsuits for it, right, there was actually a lot of discussion into turning OpenAI primarily into a profit-based company before things were ever happening. Okay, so for instance, the lawsuit that exists is so messy that, when you go to these sites and you start reading things like the truth Elon left out, Elon wants like over $100 billion in like restitution from this kind of shit because Elon was somebody that apparently didn't want this company to be like a for profit or something. Or I believe really at the end of the day, he wanted more control. But, OpenAI provides their version of things that Elon leaves out in red, for instance. Like, for instance, right over here, Elon says that over upcoming weeks, how much time should we plan for? Coming weeks, top priority, essentially, philanthropic endeavor. Must tell the story and not lose moral high ground. Absolutely vital. Now, of course, obviously, this is Elon apparently saying something, and OpenAI said what Elon left out was we got to figure out how do we transition from nonprofit to something which is essentially a philanthropic endeavor and a B Corp or C Corp or something. So who wanted this thing to be a for-profit structure? We don't really know. But apparently Microsoft guys knew that this would be coming, and they kind of positioned themselves in a way for it, which is why the whole time in the video I was saying, even if ChatGPT fails, right, OpenAI goes, Microsoft's going to be there, to pick up the pieces because, all these companies are smart. They know the writing on the wall, right? They knew when they were helping Sam Altman out, they're like, this guy doesn't have the money on his own to run this enterprise. But when it fails, and if it fails, whenever, we'll be there to pick up the actual technology because it is technology that they're interested in. And then we have full control over something that has been developed by these guys and we can move on. So which is why everyone's fighting over this with no end in sight. And when you really look at this technology before we end the video, there's a lot of other companies involved into this kind of stuff that aren't related to OpenAI, but they're also in a position where they run their own companies and they're changing how things are going to be played in the near future. So for instance, Anthropic, the guys behind Claude, who basically lead the most popular coding AI tool assistant out there, basically the most usable AI tool assistant from my research, understanding, and actual personal experiences. I played around with it for a bit, and genuinely, it is actually pretty cool stuff. Now, in 3 to 6 months, apparently AI is going to be writing 90% of the code that any software developer was in charge of. So if you're somebody that wants to be an entry-level developer, it's getting tough out there, okay? Because a lot of these guys don't really need to be hiring the junior person. They can just hopefully, maybe in the next year, entirely do most of their stuff through artificial intelligence. And again, the thing about AI stuff is that, look, if you're somebody writing AI code, the most important thing that you can have and the ability to do is understand the code that AI spits out. You can ask an artificial intelligence to say, write a calculator for you, but it is ideal that you look through that calculator and see maybe it's not making mistakes, maybe it's not leaking something out there, maybe it's handling things like error stuff right. There is a lot of stuff. You have to be able to read the code that the AI writes. So don't think it's going to be just easy. People do need to understand the fundamentals of whatever language they're working with, instead of just blindly trusting whatever Claude or any of these systems spit out. But maybe it'll get to a point where even that won't be needed, or AI can possibly correct itself when we unlock that AGI land. So if you're like somebody that is going into entry-level software engineering stuff, it's going to be tough for you because you don't really, if the AI is able to do your job faster and quicker, there's no reason to hire you, right? So for a lot of people that are actually getting these jobs, for the experienced guys, it's great because they're doing the parts of coding that the AI is unable to do right now. And those guys are the ones that are making the buku bucks. They're the ones that are still being hired. But ultimately, if you are supporting companies like this, I think you kind of write your own death warrant the longer you endorse this technology. Or you might just have to become experienced yourself, meaning that, the barrier of entry is going to get that much higher, meaning that, you're going to have to prove that A, the code that's being written, you're able to correct it, refactor it, or you're able to do levels of coding that, again, these engines aren't able to solve. And again, the other aspect of AI that's really spooky to me too is the ability for mass surveillance. Now again, to end this off with, I've talked a lot about how much I dislike mass surveillance companies. I think most people do. It's not a it's not a topic that's really shocking. But for instance, companies like Palantir, and you might not know what Palantir does, but they're a huge company when it comes to mass surveillance. A lot of government contracts have been awarded to companies like Palantir that allow it to develop technologies for organizations like ICE, a lot of the aspects of the US government where they jump in to basically create mass surveillance systems, right? Surveillance systems that right now the government will say is mostly for illegal immigration. But let's be real, once Minority Report AIs get made, eventually dissidents become the target of focus. Anybody the government doesn't like ends up being targeted by these systems. It's basically the Patriot Act on crack cocaine. It's not good. And you got like this guy, this crackhead going around saying that AI will eliminate all the mass immigration anybody needs. Because eventually everyone will have so many of their jobs displaced that you really don't need to bring anybody in from the other sides of the world just for whatever. But what he's not telling you about is, again, jobs are getting completely fucking displaced. And remember, the jobs that won't be getting displaced as quickly, according to, again, this interview, are those with vocational training. So most likely people that know a trade or two, you'll be fine until, again, robots, I guess, are competent enough to do the HVAC stuff and the electrician work that, people are currently doing. So, it's crazy to see that AI is mostly taking away the jobs from the people who, I guess, thought that AI was going to take away first. It's so weird to see this whole situation go down. But yeah, ultimately, the dream world is that we live in an age of abundance and somehow get better jobs while ignoring the fact that these great displacements that are happening right now are just not going to shake things up for the next 10 years. Now, even when it comes to Karp, who once said mass deportations are bad because I guess he was like a progressive dude, he has aligned himself with the president, describing his company's technology as anti-woke. I wonder if that has anything to fucking do with the fact that the guy has earned billions of dollars. I think it's something around 55% of their company's revenues is from these government contracts. So again, don't think that these guys are suddenly shifting their beliefs because that's what they actually believe. No, it's because this is where the fucking money is. And the money is in spying on you. But this is kind of a different point in the situation. To end off with, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to see that some of the AI stuff is finally starting to falter. Companies like Microslop are absolutely feeling some pain right now, as they should. Companies like OpenAI, maybe they might be able to make things work. It doesn't necessarily look in their favor. Not only are they getting a crazy lawsuit by the richest guy in the world, but they're also pretty much just bleeding money until realistically you can't bleed money anymore. But I think a lot of this is due to the fact that the perception of this AI shit has sort of become more realistic. People know that AI isn't going anywhere, right? I think people understand it. But I think people also realize that all this superfluous shit that these companies are pushing onto us don't really have a reason to exist. Ultimately, the most ethical way for this AI shit to exist, in my opinion, is allowing people to use these technologies on a local system. So again, maybe it won't be as flashy and nice as what you see on ChatGPT, but it'll be private, it'll be yours, it'll be local, it'll be something that, is a technology that you can play around with somewhat ethically. And I say somewhat because even if you are using local models, ultimately you're still training yourself off of copyrighted things, and all these things need to be addressed. But I think when it comes to these big frontier intelligence models, that really aren't providing much of a benefit to our life, more a hindrance than a benefit, these things need to sort of be stopped, need to be reassessed, and ultimately the guys that are making a shit ton of money right now, going from billionaire to trillionaire status in the 2030s, these people need to kind of stop, right? I am not somebody that hates OpenAI but loves things like Grok or Claude or whatever. I'm somebody that looks at all of these things, and I see that there may be a glimmer of good, but I genuinely see a lot of bad inside here. And ultimately, I wouldn't mind personally seeing all these companies falter if it means this technology becomes more democratized, more open, and ultimately people learn that you can use this without actually, blowing up and going through so many resources on servers that aren't even hosted by you, processing all your personal information, storing all your personal information, and God knows doing what with your personal information. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.